you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. If I'm not holding the microphone close enough, or if it's popping too much, please just wave at me and I'll shake it about and hopefully it'll become clearer for you. My name's Ruth Watson. I came up with the idea for Keep Scotland the Brand after yet another conversation about carrots with somebody. Carrots, root vegetables, feature quite highly in this story. Last year, I became aware of a growing tendency for the fruit and vegetables which are grown in the farms around where I live not to be as identified as they once were. The happy halcyon days of going into a shop going into a shop and seeing fruit and vegetables which have got this is really distracting. I'm sorry.
Well,
it's popping.
turn it off then.
I don't like popping. Can you hear me like this? Yes. Thank you. If you can't hear me, I'll repeat myself, but I would rather not be double checking my sound checks and the mic coming waving around.
You have the same problem as I do.
I stimulate too much projection. So I became aware, going around the supermarkets, that produce which previously did perfectly well just with the name of the farm on it and the name of the country it was produced in, suddenly seemed to be appearing with flags where flags once did not exist. And I became more aware of it over the summer because I like to buy I live in rural Angus. I want to go and buy my strawberries and my raspberries from the local farms, but from the supermarket, because where I live there are very few options and many people are in the same position that if you want to buy food, generally speaking, you're going to a supermarket for it and you're looking along the shelves and you're busy, so you're just kind of trying to get things quickly and you want to be able to make clear choices. But I became aware that I was having more and more conversations with people when I pick up a punnet and go, British strawberries from Kincardineshire? What happened to just Scottish strawberries? Or what happened to just Kincardineshire? That was fine. That was fine with me. So I finally had my road to Damascus over a bag of carrots. I went into the supermarket because I'm a good Scottish mum and I was going to make some carrot soup. And I looked at these carrots and I couldn't find Scottish carrots. But the fields near where I stay are growing the flipping things. But I wanted to buy my local carrots, and I was looking around and I realised as I looked at the Union flags bedecking all of these fruit veg around me, I felt as though I was sitting in the middle of some kind of Jubilee street party. And in a former incarnation, I was a journalist, and I'm a nosy person, and I speak to people. So I went and I did a wee bit of tippy-tapping to try and find out what was going on. And it turns out that DEFRA, that is the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, they're based out in Whitehall in London, and they have no authority in Scotland. They only have authority in England and Wales. And they came up with a campaign which they launched. It sort of had a soft launch in 2011-12 and sort of disappeared for a while, and then in 2014 it re-emerged as the Britain is Great campaign. So in case you're wondering why we've got Great British Bake-Offs and endless programmes about Churchill, there may well be a connection. So the British government decided that they were going to promote Britain and British produce as a homogenous brand across the UK and across the world. But why did they want to do that? Part of the reason is because they were looking at Scotland and Scotland's success story. Because back in the 1990s, when the mad cow disease, BSE, was threatening to eviscerate the UK market, sales in beef and produce both in the UK and overseas, Scotland's farmers, and I've spoken to the people behind this, they came up with the idea of kind of like an animal passporting scheme. They came up with the Farm Assurance Scheme. And they were able to guarantee the people buying the meat where the produce was coming from. So you know if you buy a slab of meat, and I don't because I'm a vegetarian, but I buy carrots, I don't buy meat. But you know if you buy a slab of meat, you know the farm it's come from. And that was what saved Scotland's beef industry, and then later helped grow the industry in mutton and lamb. Because people around the world went, oh, this is nice, we like provenance, people like to know where they're getting their food from. And while many parts of the United Kingdom were languishing, and the farmers were languishing with the horrific effects of BSE on many levels, Scotland's farmers were doing okay. And Scotland's food and drink producers started thinking they were onto something, and they came up with an extremely successful campaign called Scotland the Brand. That campaign picked up very cleverly on the points which people think of when they think of Scotland. If you live overseas, and I have been lucky enough to do so, if you speak to people, what do you think of when you think of Scotland? Well, in those days they would think Braveheart straight away. Nowadays it would be Jamie in his kilt. But that's an Outlander reference for those of you who watch it. Don't watch it. So they're not only thinking about heritage and hairy people running around heather with kilts on, but they're thinking heritage, and they're thinking heather and hills and fresh air and clean water and pure produce. And those who know Scotland's, those within the food and drink industry who know Scotland's worth and what it produces, they recognise that Scotland's reputation is world class. Our dairy herders, the animals kept on those farms are renowned around the world for being kept in amongst the best conditions in the world. You go into a Malaysian supermarket, a posh end one, I have seen a bottle of water for sale for what I considered a ludicrous amount of money, but they got away with it because underneath they had a little banner saying, Scottish water filtered by granite for 10,000 years. That is Scotland's brand. Scotland's brand is such that I have had people telling me that they can buy a bottle of malt whiskey, and beside the malt whiskey, for not too great a fraction of the price, is a bottle of water, so you can have the full whiskey and water experience. But that makes sense if you're living in a country where the rivers are horribly polluted, and every week you wait for the water guy to bring you your reverse osmosis treated bottles of water so you're not poisoning your kids. People look at Scotland and think, gosh, I'd like a bit of that. So when you go into a supermarket and you see Scottish produce on the shelves, unfortunately this is generally speaking only affordable for those who have the money, but people want to buy that. So you're talking about a premium product. And then on top of that premium product, you get people thinking, oh, I'd like to go there. So you end up with a tourism product. So Scotland the Brand is not just about the food and drink that we eat, it is about our exports, it is about the tourism industry. So if you have a farmer who is selling the meat to these shop shelves, chances are they might have a side business with a bed and breakfast or some glamping pods or something like that, and people are coming because they want to have that fresh air experience. People come, if you see a great British haggis, and I remember the first time I saw this, I was walking through an airport in Australia, and I kind of had one of those moments, and I said to my husband, "Do you see that?" And there is boxes of the great British haggis, and you've got the London Eye, and you've got Big Ben, and you've got a red bus. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to make you realise those people are not going to be thinking Edinburgh or Glasgow or the Highlands when they look at that box. That's brilliant for London's tourist market. It doesn't help people come all the way up to Scotland. So So that's a long way around. I got a wee bit cross when I started realising all this. And then I looked at potatoes. Because, of course, you've got your carrots and you've got your patties. So why is it that we should be careful about how our potatoes are branded? Many people say to me, oh, you're just being petty. You're just being petty. What does it matter what flags are on stuff? It matters because that's our market share. So 80% of the seed potatoes exported around the world from the United Kingdom as a whole come from Scotland. They specifically are sought after because Scotland has got some really good soil. The ground conditions are very well suited to healthy potatoes. The Scottish Agricultural College, as was, I can't remember the acronym for it now, but the new acronym that they have, but the scientific testing done is rigorous and is recognised as being rigorous, and Scotland's farmers and the Agricultural College and Scottish Government work really hard to be able to fly that flag and say, we do a tight job of testing our patties because they know that is good for business. Scotland's farmers work really, really hard to cooperate with all of the different bodies to make sure they are producing a high quality product because they know their reputation depends upon it, and with that market share. So what example do I have for that? So for example, recently, this year in Kenya, it was announced that the James Howard Institute,
Hutton.
Thank you. Yeah. Hutton, sorry, I'm having one of those days. The James Hutton Institute, thank you very much. They, in conjunction with Scotland's farmers, got a deal to go out to Kenya to help the Kenyans develop a seed potato suited for the Kenyan climate, the Kenyan ground. So there you have people looking at food justice, food poverty, trying to make sure that folk get fed in an effective way. You've got Scottish technology and farming working together with people to help them empower themselves. It then goes a step further because the Kenyans wanted to have a nice institute for developing their seed potatoes. And there's a rather renowned architect in the wee village of Lambs, where many of these tatties come from. Many of the seed potatoes are coming from this area. And the Kenyans gave this gentleman a contract to design their institute. So there you've got a Scottish architect with Scottish engineering designing a building to help develop Scottish produce suited for the Kenyan market, so the Kenyans can then go ahead and take care of themselves. That's Scotland's brand working for you. But if you Google that and look it up, you're going to find if you go on Google, half of them will go British potato success story, and the other half are talking about the Scottish success story. But it matters to our market share that we are clearly identified because we want people coming to Scotland to give us the business. This is not in any way an anti-anywhere else in the United Kingdom campaign. The campaign Keep Scotland the Brand welcomes trade with and from and to and whatever. We celebrate trade, but we want clear provenance because local provenance is good for global sales. I heard just yesterday, and was doing my happy dance, that in Wales they are asking questions now about their provenance, and they are saying that they want to have the dragon on Welsh food. I get texts and tweets from people in Norfolk and in Cornwall saying that they want their area respected because it's good for business. So the next aspect of this, we've got the local economy, you've got your tatty farmers, and you've got people going into supermarkets and thinking, well, why is choice being taken from me? You've got people going up to the milk, the milk shelves, and it's very hard in some supermarkets now to find Scottish milk. But I like buying Scottish milk, not because I don't like English cows, but because I know that Scottish milk, most of the cattle we have, is out in grass. And a grass-fed cow is producing tastier milk just because that's biology. A grass-fed cow is less stressed. so the milk is healthier and the animal welfare is better. If I want to make that buying choice, I should be allowed to make that buying choice and not have that taken from me by the political decisions of someone elsewhere and decisions I actually don't understand, because it's not a market decision. I've been speaking to dairymen. I've been speaking to them, a guy who helped the Milk Marketing Board into its demise, and we've had long conversations about how accurate you can be with the milk. There's no excuse. Supermarkets have no excuse for saying, oh, we can't possibly separate the milk. You can separate the milk right down to the farm assured, to the cow and what it had for breakfast, if you want. Now, one of the reasons this matters in a Brexit, this Brexit utopia that we're looking at, one of the reasons this matters is because the Americans, as part of this brave new world that we're being taken into, the Americans have got some pretty good ideas about what they want. And it's not going to really resonate very well with what many Scots actually want, or what we voted for. But this is not a party political campaign, but it's hard to talk about food without thinking that actually some things we've got to pay attention to. I was speaking to a gentleman yesterday, 2 days ago, who is very senior in the food and drink industry in Scotland. He said that he had been dining with the American ambassador at a recent visit over. The American ambassador had explained to him that his vision, America's vision for the United Kingdom, is for there to be no labelling which gets in the way of us making choices making a differentiation between our goods and American goods. So forget, we're looking at a whole new ball game of horror here, because there was in the newspapers as well recently, the Americans are saying that they think a lot of these petty regulations are just getting in the way of business, and they don't want to have to come up to our extremely high regulations and standards. They just want us to chuck them out the window. Now, one of the reasons, if you're looking at a pint of milk, if you're wanting a bit of milk to put in your cornflakes in the morning, one of the reasons why Scottish milk tastes so good is because we've got, high welfare standards. There's a wonderful euphemism which I will explain for you. There's a level of antibodies, and I don't have the exact figure because I've just forgotten it, but there's a level of antibodies which is allowed in your milk. The British antibodies, Scottish antibodies are kind of down here, American antibodies kind of up there. The Americans allow a much, much greater percentage of antibodies in their milk and dairy produce. Antibodies equate into pus. We're talking about animals with mastitis, with diseases which mean that they're being treated with antibiotics. In the UK, in Scotland, our levels are very, very low. So if you're enjoying your breakfast cornflakes, you have no need to be squeamish. The American milk is a much lower standard. Now, if you're looking at the kind of milk that you want being made into baby formula, or your lattes or your flat whites, I want to be able to choose where my milk is coming from. In Scotland, we have animal sentience rules. There are rules about how the conditions animals should be kept in and their welfare. So in Westminster, in December, at the end of November last year, the Westminster politicians made a decision with the animals in England and Wales to remove sentience legislation because they didn't like these fussy EU laws saying that animals had to be kept to a particular welfare standard. In this brave Brexit world, we threw the standards out and we just come up with something that's good for international trade deals. Of course, the politicians at the time said, well, don't worry about it. We'll come up with new regulations. They're going to be wonderful. You're going to love them. Don't worry about it. The next day, the farmers in Scotland sent a delegation to our Scottish government demanding that Scotland keep rules to protect animal welfare, because Scotland's farmers want our standards kept high. They want their animals protected and they want their reputation on the world market to be protected. It is National Farmer Union Scotland policy for any powers on agriculture to come back to Scotland's devolved Parliament. And they have come to that policy by doing a tour, speaking to farmers around Scotland. So Whitehall has got a very interesting perspective on the direction that they want us to take. Recently you might have noticed that they are in talks with Australia. Wonderful, we're going to have great deals with Australia, win-win situation, one MEP said. Australian beef currently is not legal in Europe because they give their animals growth hormones. At least one of those growth hormones has been identified as a possible, and by possible we're talking, like tobacco might cause cancer, kind of possible. It has been identified as a possible carcinogen, and that's one of the reasons why it is not allowed in any product being sold in the EU. Australia has made clear within the last week that they insist, as part of a trade deal, they be allowed to sell their beef in the UK. One of the reasons that matters with us potentially losing our identifiers, we have PGI, Protected Geographic Indicators. That is as close as you can get to a patent for food. March 2019, probably the 30th, probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, we're going to lose that protection. People talk about the transition period and think that's great, we're going to have 3 years of everything still being fluffy. It's not. We lose a lot at the end of March next year. One of those is PGI protection. Scotch beef, I told you about the farm insurance scheme, that's a PGI. That means that the Australians, if you have got an Aberdeen Angus herd of cattle, and it's a breed, so you can have an Aberdeen Angus herd of cattle in Australia, you can sell that with its growth hormones as Scotch beef as of the 30th of March 2019, if Westminster goes ahead with trade deals. Further to that, Whitehall, I had a meeting with a farming representative recently, and he told me, this man is an arable farmer, he grows grain for a living. There's an interesting statistic which I will briefly point out to you. There are two kinds of land as far as governance and farmers are concerned. You've got the kind of the great stuff, favoured area land, which means that you can grow whatever crops you want in it. You then have other land which is called less favoured area. It has less favoured area status. So in England, they are blessed with great fens and fields. 20% of their land is less favoured area status. The rest is good for growing grain and other crops. You get these great big farms and everybody's doing lots of business. You get the places where you're talking about the Yorkshire Dales and the like, that's where you're getting your hill farms. In Scotland, 80% of our land is less favoured area status. 20% can grow grain and the like. So if we're losing less favoured area status, if we're losing support and people losing focus on the profitability of our rural landscape with sheep, and sheep are a huge part of our rural landscape, and Highland cattle and the animals that kind of wander about, actually making some pretty good landscapes for a lot of protected species on the side. So if we lose hill farming, and many farmers are saying they fear we might, that's bad. Obviously, that's where we get our sheep and all the rest of it from. But this arable farmer who's sitting with some of the best land in Scotland, I mean, beautiful, friable soil that grows the most amazing produce, and he tells me that he has had a meeting at Whitehall, and he knows that they are talking about letting arable fail because it is cheaper to import than support. It was in the papers recently. The Welsh Assembly put this to their government, to their assembly as well, and said that the figure they're looking at is 25% of land. Well, that 25% land, a lot of it is going to be land that we farm on in Scotland. So I said to this chap, "You're joking? They're going to let arable fail? What do you mean?" And then I've got another farmer, an elderly gentleman, who's whose political views will never align with mine, but that's fine, because this campaign is not about party politics, and it's not about the Constitution. I started this campaign because I live in a community where the people around me farm the soil, one way or another. They are the people that get food onto my table. 3 times a day I am grateful to a farmer, and I don't care what their politics were. I want my kids going to a school where their friends are doing fine. I want the wee wifey that's running the cafe down the street from me and tells me that she's working a 60-hour week and hasn't turned a profit for 6 months because the price of butter has gone up. I want them to do okay. I want the people I go to the dancing with, or the people I go for my coffee mornings with. I don't care what their politics are. I sit down and I have a cup of tea with them. We work together because we're a community. And that's why I started this campaign. This gentleman said to me, he said, I have been farming my land all my life. There have been farmers on my land for 4,500 years. And I do not want to be the last. And he fears he might be. A man who spent his entire life feeding this country. And I said to the chap sitting beside him, what are you talking about? DEFRA's going to let farming fail. And he said, well, the thinking is that it's cheaper to import it from the Ukraine than to grow it ourselves. Which brings me to my next point, which is surely food security is the primary duty of any government. Surely the first thing any government has to ensure is that its people are getting fed food which is not going to poison them, food which is going to nourish them, food that's going to make them feel good about life. Surely part of the duty of any government is to ensure that we've got healthy, thriving communities that can sit down to a decent meal at night. I don't know if any of you noticed there was a wee flurry of snow recently, and the supermarkets looked like something out of The Walking Dead. There was nothing. How can it be that we're surrounded by supermarkets and there's no food? And I've got a guy telling me that Whitehall thinks it's going to be fine to rely on our food coming in entirely from other nations, to lose our farms, to lose our skills, to lose our communities. There's weapons of mass destruction sitting up the Clyde that you can't slice, trident up and put it on toast for hungry kids. They're telling us that's our defence. To me, when I'm looking at an empty shelf and nobody with food coming in, you're telling me that that's not a better priority. Surely, if that had continued for one more week, can you imagine the stress if the snow had lasted a few more days? As my husband put it, a wise man, good choice of character, as he put it, Kim Jong-un could have sailed up the Firth of Forth with a couple of pallets of bread and a wee jug of milk, and we'd have handed him the keys to Hollywood, because the hungry people are vulnerable. We don't need to have people threatening us with weapons. We just need people with a few clipboards and a couple of extra sheets, and they can control us. Now, I am not a conspiracy theorist, but to me, it makes sense that we do not lose our farms and our farming communities and the knowledge handed down for thousands of years and the skills and the expertise. So, I'm almost coming to the end of my point. I'm sure there's a point in here somewhere. Pretty much nailed it, to be honest. So recently, I was extremely pleased, and I keep emphasising, this is not a party political campaign. This is for absolutely everyone. I will only deal with people on a cross-party basis about this, and I'm here talking to you tonight. I've been talking to the Rotarians. I'll talk to anybody who wants to listen to me. I go and I speak to farmers, and recently I was speaking to Pete Wishart, who, as MP for a rural area and the chair of the Scottish Select Committee, has managed to get a cross-party select committee looking at, I will get the exact wording for it, Scotland, Brexit and trade negotiations. And as part of that cross-party select committee, he has got the issue of Scottish branding put onto the agenda. That now is open for submissions. They are looking for submissions from anyone and everyone who has an opinion. And quite frankly, anyone who sits down to eat should have an opinion about this. This campaign, the one thing that unites all of us, regardless of our political views, our outlook, our gender, our orientation, anything, the one thing we have in common is we should be grateful to farmers and food and drink producers every time we sit down to a table and eat the food put in front of us, and know that food is of a quality that we can be assured, so that whether you're somebody whose shopping consists entirely of budget brands, you know that food has got the nourishing, the nutritive quality of somebody who's skipping off to Waitrose and buying something fancy with a fancy name on it. That is food justice, is being able to feed people in a way which you're not buying your way in or out of trouble. It should not be that we are only the wealthy can afford to feed their children healthy food. And so when we're looking at the campaign, when we're looking at Keep Scotland the Brand, what is it I'm asking you to do? I am asking you to contact your politicians. I am asking you to contact your politicians at every level. I am asking you to support your local food and drink producers by writing a submission and saying to the Scottish Select Committee at Westminster why it's important to keep Scotland the brand. This is not a boycott campaign in any way, shape or form. It's not. I go down to my local shop. There's only one supermarket where I live. If I want to go somewhere else and buy something that doesn't have a flag on it, I'd have to drive for miles. Many people do not have the luxury of a choice about what they're buying. But I can buy the carrots, and it sticks in my craw, but I can take a photograph of it, and I can send a wee tweet, and I'll say to the supermarket, Keep Scotland the brand, and I get a weary reply. Okay, Ruth, that's fine, we'll think about it. But I know that this is working because I had a lovely gentleman sidled up to me outside the farmer's market one day, and he said, "Are you the reason I'm getting all these emails?" I said, "Oh, I do hope so. Why?" And he said, "Oh, he's a soft fruit grower, and he has 4 or 5 lines of fruit going down, and each one the same fruit goes in the same punnets and gets a different label slapped on the top. And he puts the labels on that the supermarkets ask him to. And supermarkets, we send the emails, and the supermarkets send them to him, and he replies to them in a weary way. But he says, actually, it's good. It's good to be held to account. He quite enjoys the fact that people are at least thinking about where their food is coming from. So I would ask you, please, be positive, be supportive, contact the government, let the Select Committee know what you think about the importance of Scotland's branding. Contact the supermarkets and be positive, be ebullient, be joyous, go out and speak to people and be enthusiastic and try and let them know why they should feel some passion for what's happening, because in a year's time, we might not have any choices left. And in several years' time, I'm speaking to hill farmers who say we might not have any hill farms left. So please, keep Scotland the brand. Thank you. Occasionally, and it's interesting because there are nuances with GM. So the kind of GM crops that we think of are the kind that perhaps has a gene from a halibut spliced into a strawberry, and that's a kind of sort of Frankenstein food scenario, and it is absolutely the case that because Scotland is GM free, that adds cachet to our product. So that's one of the reasons why, my understanding, that's one of the reasons why people are loath to change that. But it is interesting speaking to farmers who say that if it were possible to speed up the selective breeding process we tweak a GM, then that might be something worth thinking about. But I think the analogy is, well, I wouldn't use the analogy I was going to use, but I think that there's a lot of caution about that, because once a GM genie's out the bottle, you can't rein it back in, and that's a big problem with bringing American food in, because American food with GM soya, for example, America made the decision not to differentiate between normal soya and GM soya. And so now if you buy any soya product from America, you can't say whether it's GM or not, because they're all just mixed in together. That was a conscious decision they made, and that's one of the problems with having deals with Americans, for example. If we end up buying bread, and that bread has used American soya flour, we are going to be eating GM bread. So years ago, I actually did an interview with one of the senior chemists at Monsanto, and it was very interesting speaking to him, because he was showing to me this vision of a world where, for example, so most of the world's pesticides and chemicals are used on cotton. Cotton is a highly fragile crop, needs a lot of nurturing, and a lot of pesticides and yucks are going on that. And he was saying to me, well, of course, we've saved the world, basically, because in Egypt with cotton, they're not using the same pesticides and chemicals, so that's better for the waterways. And it's hard not to be slightly seduced when you're looking at that payoff. But what's happened since, speaking to farmers in different parts of the world, they're very disenchanted with GM, because what happens is GM create Monsanto and others like it, just so I'm not getting hit with a slander, companies which produce GM crops often also produce the products to go with it. And that crop often, regardless of who it is that is designing that GM crop, often that crop will only grow if it is given the chemical or whatever to nurture it. What happens traditionally in traditional farming areas, farmers who don't have a lot of money, for thousands of years, they've taken parent crop, they've kept seed for the next year's crop. If you use GM crops, that is not the case. You can't do that. You have to go back every year to buy GM. So many farmers in developing countries in particular are very disenchanted with it, because the yields don't keep on. You're not getting such a good deal. You're having to throw more chemicals on it. So from an environmental point of view, from a food justice point of view, GM isn't so great, perhaps. From a food point of view, Monsanto and others like it are a very powerful lobby group, which Scotland has managed to resist. And Scotland, I know, is very firm. That's one of the reasons why I understand agriculture and farmers want agriculture devolved back to the Scottish Government, because farmers do not want to have GM crops put in front of them. But on top of that, that's the problem we're going to have after Brexit. It's a whole thing about divergence and convergence. Farmers are facing a playing field which is not level. If people don't know what they're buying, if you go into a shop and you see a loaf of bread costs 70 pence and another loaf of bread costs 50 pence, many people, for many reasons, are going to go for the 50 pence loaf. But that loaf probably is cheaper because it's got GM in it. But then how much longer can the farmer whose loaf isn't being bought survive? And I think this is one of the issues that I think people haven't really thought about, is the market forces that we might find ourselves having to fight against. It's very, very hard to resist lowering your standards if you're looking at oblivion and the loss of your farm. Well, I can't speak for all farmers, but and I may well be wrong in this because I'm talking off the top of my head and I'm rubbish with figures, but there are a lot of documents out there to double check what I'm saying. So I'll put that caveat in. My understanding is the NFU produced a document earlier this year. My memory is that it is 80% of Scottish farms are small to medium enterprises. 40% of those farms, the household income for those farms is £26,400. I've got it written down, so I remember that bit. That's not big. However, I had a lovely cup of coffee with a very nice gentleman who is one of the biggest potato farmers in Scotland, and he has grave reservations, and he is very, very keen on one of the reasons he's here is because of Scotland's reputation in the potato market. So, without putting words into anybody's mouth, I would say that Scotland's brand is recognised across all sectors of food and drink as being a massive issue. Scotland's food and drink has risen 40% in the last 3 years, is the revenue we're getting in from Scotland's food and drink. The top 2 grossing products in Scotland's economy, in fact, in the UK's economy, but they don't get counted as Scottish, you've got whisky and you've got salmon. That is the 2 top grossing products selling out of the United Kingdom. So, for example, looking at whisky, in the recent trade deals in July last year, the Americans made it clear, in October last year, the Peruvians made it clear, they want the right to call their whisky Scotch. As part of Brexit trade deals, that is what they were looking for. And when we lose PGI on Scotch whisky, there's nothing to stop them. In the recent Scotch Whisky Day, which was held back in February, it drives me nuts just to think about it. I looked at the picture today just to make me angry again. DEFRA produced a congratulations to Scotch Whisky on Scotch Whisky Day. They produced this beautiful picture, a moody, wonderfully peaty lit image of a gentleman working and a big barrel's in front of them, and you've got sepia colours, and you can almost taste the Highland peat. And across this barrel, congratulating Scotland on Scotch Whisky Day, was this half Union flag, and Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Why would DEFRA, an organisation which has no authority in Scotland, why would DEFRA be promoting Scotch whisky with the words Great Britain and Northern Ireland over it? And that is one of the questions that I am going to be asking next week when I go with several colleagues to the food and drink growth team at the Scottish Government. There's one of the farmers, a chap local to here, who started Scotland's first farmers market. He has recently given up his hill farm and is just producing enough beef and mutton for his burger business, which he started out because he thinks that hill farming is goosed and he's worried. And another gentleman who is part of an award-winning fish processors or producers, and he kind of gets artisan fish that's been fished the way that Robert the Bruce did it, and he sells it to people. And to 2 people who are very senior and very well versed in Scotland's food and drink industry. We're going to go and talk to Scotland's government, and hopefully we're going to be making submissions to the Scottish Select Committee, because this is a huge issue. And the more you speak to people behind the scenes, and you'll find this maybe if you're leafleting, the more you will find how concerned farmers and food and drink producers and fishers are. I've got friends up in Orkney. I was lucky enough to live in Orkney in the Northern Isles for several years. There's a friend of mine. Every day he risks his life to make sure people get nice fish, nice shellfish. He puts on a scuba mask, he goes diving, he picks each crab and scallop by hand, because that is the environmentally and sustainable way to do it. He slides into Orkney's cold grey waters to make sure that this food, this quality food appears on people's tables. His market predominantly is in Spain. He's really worried what's going to happen to his market. If you look at some of the top menus across Scotland and the UK, you are looking at Orkney shellfish. For many Orcadians and Shetlanders and folk in the Western Isles, keep Orkney the brand and keep Shetland the brand makes a lot more sense. We have to celebrate our local provenance, our local name, because local provenance, local names are good for global business. And many farmers and food and drink producers and fishers are absolutely supportive of that. And many of them don't know what's happening. I go out to farmers. I was on the phone to a Mart manager the other day. This guy has got colleagues across Scotland selling livestock and produce and grain. And I was telling him about the Australian beef and telling him about the select committee. And he said to me, "How do you know all this?" Because I speak to people and I read the papers. But many people don't know. It's like the Piper Hamlin, and we're being dragged to oblivion. So we've got to get out there, get the leaflets, and get out there and tell people what's happening before we wake up and it's too late because it's gone. You get that in Lancashire, in Norfolk. The other day I had a Lancashire lettuce in my farm box because I'm lucky enough to have a farm delivery service, and I've had a Lancashire lettuce and a wee Lancashire flag, and it happens. It happens. These things, it's all possible. Packaging is all possible. Exactly. So DEFRA started this campaign. It's been taken over by the Department for International Trade, and it's being punted everywhere. Supermarkets are being encouraged and persuaded. Perhaps they don't need persuasion. I can't put words into their mouths. But this is coming from Whitehall. And what I find fascinating is the fact that it is happening in Scotland, when this is not something that is a legislative part of the legislative competence. But it is possible. It's down to the supermarkets to make a choice. No, the producer. So it depends. If the farmer produces and packages the product his or herself, that is their choice. Yeah. Otherwise, the farmers are under the control of the supermarkets. I had a 70-year-old farmer who, again, her politics and mine will never align, but we chat and we get on, and that's fine. She told me, when I handed her a leaflet, she said, "Oh, you're preaching to the converted with this. I have walked out of supermarkets in disgust when I have seen what they have done with my produce." This is not something which is welcomed by many farmers, because farmers know that Scotland's brand sells. And you're saying people have a choice, and you know that the labelling is clear. It's not always clear. I can't find in some supermarkets. I can't find Scottish milk. Yeah, I can't find Scottish butter. It is about our choices being removed. And if you go to the National Farmers Union, all of their publicity material and all of their information material, which they have been bringing out since November of last year, states clearly in several locations that they want clear provenance and they want clear labelling so consumers can make clear choices. Scotland's farmers don't do the same thing. That's one of the reasons why American and Australian meat doesn't come into this country, unless it's I can't even tell you unless it's under certain caveats. I don't know that, but that's why they don't come in. So, for example, New Zealand meat, New Zealand lamb, it's produced to high standards, and it is in accordance with the EU standards, and so they are able to sell their meat, because they don't do that. So There are huge problems in waterways. I was reading a report the other day which was speaking about the measurable levels of antibiotics in the waterways surrounding these farms where the runoff comes. And people who are drinking that are developing antibiotic resistance. Yeah. So we're not only messing with the animals, we're making ourselves vulnerable to returning to the days in the 1930s where a wee pimple could see you shuffle off your motor coil in 3 days. We're playing with fire. And the other thing, which is a bit of an aside, which this fruit farmer was telling me, because he's also a chartered environmentalist, which is a lovely thing to have a conversation with a chap who's that knowledgeable. I asked him about an article I'd read recently, last year, which is saying that farmers are very worried because the phrase, we have only 100 harvests left in our land, was made several years ago. I think we're down to 36 now. And you get several harvests in a year, so we're not just talking of 36 years. I mean, we're looking perhaps 5-6 years, and we're looking at our soil structure being so damaged, we're finding it hard to produce food. Now, one of the things which breaks my heart about Brexit is that Europe has got an approach to try and remedy this, and are going down towards a much more organic model. I think it's Austria, Denmark, France, and there's somewhere else that is at the point. I think Denmark is 80% organic now. So you're looking at people who are trying to find interesting ways, like diversifying, reducing an animal's need for antibiotics by putting, I don't know if any goes to the archers, I'm a big archer fan, herbal lays. Herbal lays. One of the reasons herbal lays work is because animals are able to graze in the way traditionally animals would go. So they nibble about the medicinal stuff. That's why in the olden days, medieval times, everyone had their garden physic if they could. And in Europe still, many people, you're chucking your thyme and your marigold and all sorts of. That's cooking with medicines. I mean, those are just herbal medicines that you're keeping your resistance up. So people who are living and working in this way, that's the way that Europe's going, and we're looking at having to eat animals that are pumped full of antibiotics. And then this same gentleman was telling me that he's been at this sort of biodiversity hub in Ireland, and he said that what blew him away was that they told him that in 35 years, people working of all the staff that had worked in their farm, only 2 had died of cancer. That's a fairly big statistic for a farm that's got quite a good turnover of food. We can't say for sure what it is that's had that effect, but the implication strongly is that people who eat a healthy, full diet that is coming from animals and plants that are raised in holistic ways, perhaps have got a better chance in life, which is why Scotland's environment is so important, because if we feed our people properly from healthy animals that are grass-fed running around the hills, that's better for you than an animal that's kept in a barn under stress. We're facing the World Health Organization is quite bleak about the approach, which is highly worrying, and farmers have got a huge responsibility, and many responsible farmers care about that. So that's one of the reasons why in Scotland, when a farmer has an animal that has mastitis or a problem and needs to be treated with antibiotics, that milk gets jettisoned. It's not used. And that's one of the reasons why American milk is a problem, because that milk does get used. Or some of it does. I make no comment on that, because this is not a political campaign and it is not about the Constitution. I have my own personal views. I am speaking to farmers who are becoming increasingly perturbed to have their previous loyalties tested by what they see as perhaps a rolling scale of catastrophe coming towards them. But I leave that question hanging, because this is not a political campaign, and it's really important that actually it's really important that we're able to talk to people across the spectrum, because the one thing that unites us is we all have to eat. And I would rather have people sitting down around a table with me, chatting to try and come to their own conclusions than to prejudice anybody's viewpoint with my own personal views. No. Let's take it one step further, because the gentleman I was speaking to 2 days ago, as I said, an extremely senior former figure in a multinational business, the conversation that he had with the American ambassador 2 weeks ago over dinner, he said to me, forget Keep Scotland the brand, we're going to lose the UK as well. So DEFRA won't have a Great British campaign. DEFRA, we're looking at 50-second state material here, really was his concern. And that's one of the reasons why I think he was speaking to me. Be passionate with your elected representative. We are in a minority in Westminster, of course we are. But people have to be aware of what the choices are before them. Translate the energy that you have into trying to spread the word. Go into fishmongers and speak to fishmongers. Go into butchers and speak to butchers. My children cannot believe how high the ironing pile in my house now is. Because my energies have gone from ironing, angry ironing, to phoning up farmers and marts and fishmongers and speaking to them. It is healthier to get out and speak to people. Put some money into the crowdfunder so we can get more leaflets, so that you can go into as many fishmongers and butchers as you can. So if you see an old wifey buying carrots, you can hand her a leaflet and you can talk to her about it. Because if we as Scotland stand up and talk to each other, then we can at least have our voices heard together. If we do nothing, then we will walk off that precipice and we will wonder why we didn't do anything. And rather than howl at the wind on my own, if it wasn't for you guys, I would just be having this raving conversation in my kitchen again. We've got to get out and speak to people and get down to Westminster, get down to the select committee. Email them, send in a submission. Yes, we are in a minority in Westminster, but if the people of Scotland wake up, speak to each other and start making noises, then perhaps we will be able to control the destiny that we face. Well, that's a whole other kettle of fish. So that's one of the reasons why Snowmageddon hit some supermarkets more than others. Some supermarkets with a European heritage, shall we say, didn't run out of food. And the reason they didn't run out of food is because their infrastructure means that they buy from local supermarkets. I actually was speaking to one of the farmers who kept food on the plates for people in Montrose, and he said that his handler is always on the phone to him saying, how can we make this more local? How can we get higher profile, get more food out? And they deal with the logistics are local. This chartered environmentalist I was telling you about, he was telling me that one of the reasons why we see so many Kenyan green beans on our supermarket shelves is because those green beans are being grown in this country, but it is cheaper to fly them to Kenya and get them processed and chopped and packaged, and then under EU legislation, they then have to be called Kenyan because they have come into the country from Kenya. Those beans have done how many thousands of air miles to get to our plate? How fresh can a bean be if it has flown further in the world than I've been on my holidays this year to get back to my plate after it's been picked? There is a huge issue to do with logistics. And I think that is an issue which the supermarkets need to look at. I know that it is something, because I'm now lucky enough to be chatting to the kind of people who care about these things and deal with these things, I know it is something which is often looked at. Whilst I would say that the people in Redhill and Leeds probably really welcome the work, given the way that things are, and there are things which happen, products which come from England and get treated in Scotland and elsewhere and then go back to England. The nature of trade today is such that there's a lot of integration. So I would not say anything which was going to prejudice the people of Redhill and Leeds and their employment. However, I think that there's a bigger ethical issue of the carbon footprint. I mean, I want to buy food which is fresh, and I don't want to buy food which has travelled to Kenya and back from a mince and tatties, my vegetarian mince and tatties. So I'm not looking at this in a protectionist way. I am looking at it in a way, I want to know where it's come from because I don't want to mess up the world while I'm getting my dinner. And I think that there is certainly an ethical conversation to be had about the way in which food is produced. So when I was standing outside the Forfar Farmers Market recently, and I was chatting to a wife, incongruously coming out the farmers market with a lampshade she had just bought. That's an aside. And I was giving her my spiel about the potatoes. And she had a couple of wee mites in tow, and there was a granny. And this size, piped up. I know why tatties are important. He said, I know all about seed potatoes in Scotland because my mum's a tatty roger. My mum works in the factory. She packs potatoes and I don't want her to lose her job. So people are working. People are working close by to the product. But there's an ethical carbon footprint issue, I would say, rather than I wish people in Redhill Leeds every joy with employment. I just think that we need to have a more ethical approach to the way in which the food miles. Keep Scotland the brand has a crowdfunder going. The crowdfunder is to pay for leaflets. It is to pay for the printing of the leaflets. What happens when people like yourselves, when you order Keep Scotland the brand leaflets, you are being asked to pay the postage and packing only. We hold the crowdfunder so that we can, the people of Scotland are paying for the leaflets. So just round about Christmas time, we came out. It was actually brilliant. It was complete kismet. I was standing in a miserable day outside the Forfar Farmers Market, and one of my colleagues said, "We need leaflets." 3 days later, by some psychic fairy, I don't know what, somebody called me up from Peterhead and said, "We need leaflets." And they organised it. And we got an editorial committee put up of several groups working together so that it was as representative of people across Scotland as it could be, and we came up with the leaflets. All of the work which is being done for Keep Scotland the brand, most of it coming from the frenzied passage of my kitchen with the ironing pile behind it. All you guys, all the people who work on the editorial side of things, every single bit of that work, we here today, all of it is donated time. None of the money in the crowdfunder is going to me or any of my colleagues in Keep Scotland the brand. We do not want your money. We want your money to go into the leaflets so that people like you guys can go and hand them out and tell people why they should keep Scotland the brand. If you see the crowdfunder, whether it's £1, whether it's £5, many a mickle makes a muckle, I always say. It doesn't matter how little. I will value, even if you're sticking 20 pence in, I will value that 20 pence and I will thank you for it. So please, keep Scotland the brand.